All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Gary Huggins, Executive Director of the Direct Selling Education Foundation. Welcome to DSEF's latest installment of our customer-centric webinar series. Today, we're going to talk about customer service micro-failures, how to surprise, delight, and win back customers. A lot there to unpack. We still have participants joining in, but just to sort of set this up, microfailures are a unique form of service failure that typically goes unnoticed by companies and unmentioned by consumers, and they tend to happen twice as often as the larger and more identifiable service failures that we see out there, microfailures, if you will. So today we pulled together a fantastic expert panel that will talk about strategies to detect, repair, and prevent microfailures. They'll also talk about how companies and the sales field can look for small, unexpected ways to excite customers and either regain or proactively build loyalty among customers. Our conversation today was inspired by award-winning academic research conducted by two of our guests. And they wrote a paper that we will put in the chat, and I would commend that to your attention. It's a great read, and I think a great capture of a lot of the things that we'll talk about today. So with that, let's meet our distinguished panel. And I'll give brief introductions. There's a more complete introduction available to you in links in the show notes. So I would encourage you to learn more about all three of our guests that are with us today. First, we have Dr. Colin Campbell, who's an assistant professor of marketing at the University of San Diego. His research focuses on the innovations and resulting challenges that the internet presents for marketers. He's an expert on digital and social media advertising with a particular focus on online video advertising, influencer and native advertising, and deal collectives. Colin is also a DSEF Fellow. Welcome, Colin. Happy to have you with us. His colleague, Dr. Sean Sands, is a professor of marketing and director of customer experience and research group at Swinburne University of Technology in Australia. Sean has a passion for a diverse range of research topics based on the customer experience, including innovation, retail, and social media. And finally, Lori Truman, who is the Vice President of US Sales at USANA Health Sciences. In that role, she ensures that strategic initiatives align with USANA's vision to create the healthiest family on earth. Lori partners closely with associates to help them strategically reach their business goals, develop leadership skills, and expand their teams. And I want to especially thank our guests. This is an interesting set of time zones here. We've got Eastern time zone, Mountain time zone, Western time zone, and our friend from Australia who's sitting with us at 5 a.m. His time this morning. So thank you all for being so hearty with our previous conversations and for this conversation today. So we are going to have an interactive discussion. We really want to know what's on your mind. What's most important to us is sort of hear your questions. I'm certainly going to have a conversation with Colin, Sean, and Lori as we begin. And they've got some things that they want to share with us for sure, but knowing what's on your mind is what really makes this valuable to us and we think to you. So we want to encourage you to use that Q&A function to share questions with us as we go. I'll certainly pull them in by the end, but I'll be looking for questions that perhaps go right in the flow of what we're discussing as well. So please use that function as well. Also, as we go through our set of questions, Sean and Colin will be sharing their screen to show us some things that they've prepared and put together for us. So with that, why don't we start with a few questions for Colin and Sean, getting at your, again, award-winning research and paper, getting at some of the details there. What do we know about customer service failures, and are they all the same in the eyes of the company and the consumer?
Yeah, thanks. I might jump in there. Thanks again for having us. I think one of the things that we kind of reflected on when we were doing this research, we spend a lot of time as academics traveling to conferences around the world back pre-COVID, and we noticed there was really a lot of service failures that were occurring on airlines that were noticeable. There were delays, there were long lines, there were issues with check-ins and so on. But there are also a lot of things that were kind of unnoticed. Small things like if we put a special meal request in that might not have come through, or just those kind of things that maybe weren't big enough to really make a complaint about, but they kind of were irritating, and they tended to build up over time and make us a little bit, I guess, upset with the experience that we were receiving. So that got us thinking that there are these differences between the kinds of service failures that do occur in the market, and we wondered if this was the same for other consumers.
Gotcha. When you think about the effectiveness of service recovery and when things go wrong, what are some of the factors that that impact the effectiveness of trying to fix that situation?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of work that's looked at service recovery and how you can make things right. There's a really interesting, almost a paradoxical finding in research, that a dissatisfied customer that complains and then goes through a service recovery effort and is compensated in some way, and that the compensation could be monetary, it could be just pure, apology. But those consumers that go through that experience often have stronger connection to the brand after experiencing that negative service failure and then going through the recovery. So that's something that we find is really interesting as well.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting to me too when you think about and thinking about your paper where you touched on this, that it's important to have kind of a wide toolbox of service recovery options, whether you're getting at those kinds of failures that's recompensating or other things that you need to address in different ways, correct?
Mhm. Yeah, exactly right. And there's definitely no one size fits all. One of the things we find is that empowering staff to actually make decisions on the spot is one of the best things you can do for your service team, because you give them the power to make corrections at the point in time where they see something going wrong. And too often, I think firms don't allow staff to actually make decisions or step outside of the kind of rules.
Yeah. Yeah. And why is it that large failures tend to be the focus of our recovery efforts?
Yeah, I think looking at our research and the interviews that we did with consumers, it tends to be that the large things are firstly the things that people feel comfortable to complain about. Smaller things, they get the kind of fear that they'll be judged or that maybe it's not a big enough concern to other people. So it's the bigger things that tend to get, I suppose, spoken about, hence they tend to get noticed by firms. And also they're just typically, they could also be operational issues. So firms actually see them, they're more transparent. It's easy to see that a flight's been delayed, whereas it's not so easy to see that, a number of people on the flight haven't received their special meal.
Right. Understood. And is it true that that I think would seem obvious that the larger failures are those that are typically communicated, but it's really a challenge to us, isn't it, to find out what are those failures that customers don't bring forth, and how do we dig into that? What are some of the strategies there?
Yeah, that's really hard. And in fact, we've got a slide that we'll talk to that as we go through. But we think it's very much about making people feel comfortable about complaining, which is a little bit counteractive for firms, because you kind of don't want, obviously you don't want complaints, but it's definitely we see it as allowing consumers to feel that no issue is too small. Feel free to have an open and honest conversation with us as a brand. And we're here in a relationship with you, as opposed to being a brand that's sort of sitting high and mighty above a hill and just expects consumers to do as they're told.
Sure. And you can unearth good things and bad things that way, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I don't know how you guys want to go through it. You may want to, I don't know if you want to share some parts of your presentation, or we can certainly kind of keep going through questions, but I kind of want to let you steer the ship here.
Yeah, look, we're happy to flow either way. We've got a series of slides that we can talk through, and we could jump in and out of questions if you want. Happy to roll however.
Why don't we do that? And then I want to pull Lori in, especially or as well, so that we kind of can pull this conversation from the broad, to more specific thoughts about direct selling. But I'd be curious to see some of the slides you put together, because I think there's some interesting stuff to kind of set us up for this.
Awesome. So I believe I'm screen sharing. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Awesome. Great. All right. So as I said, jump in with questions. If I can't see the chat or the Q&A, so if anyone, feel free to interrupt at any time.
Will do. Thank you.
So I guess, and also to Colin, we'll just jump in and out as you see fit. Feel free to interrupt me as well. I guess the first kind of big picture is, what are service failures? And as I mentioned, pre-COVID, we spent a lot of time in airplanes. It's been a couple of years since we've been in one. But you know, these service failures are inevitable. They happen. The definition of a service failure is a performance that tends to fail to meet a customer's expectations. So that in itself has a lot of wiggle room, right? So what is a customer's expectation? Customer expectations vary, but quite often, as we said, these service failures are vary in their size and severity. Size in terms of they could be relatively small or quite large, or this kind of spectrum of what we're calling micro failures, which are almost like the fractures that you might experience in a relationship. What's interesting about service failures is that they are inevitable. And we think the reason, and research suggests the reasons why they are inevitable, is that service tends to rely on human-to-human interactions, and we can't, humans are fallible, and as are processes in organizations. As we touched on, failures tend to be large in the kind of research that investigates service failures. They tend to be large because they are more easily to identify and because consumers tend to complain about them more readily. We also find that compensation and apologies can have this, as I mentioned, this kind of interesting counterintuitive effect where it can actually improve customer goodwill, customer engagement between the firm and the customer after a service failure and a recovery has occurred. The other thing is to note is that these service failures generally are kind of agnostic to industries. We first started looking at this in the airline industry, and there's a whole lot of basically every airline you look into, there's you read books about the kinds of service failures that occur, but they're definitely not solely in the airline service. In fact, we see them across a whole range of FMCG and furniture goods, service organizations, manufacturer brands, and even brands that consumers love, right? Like Tesla had a recent episode where they had to apologize over the way it was handling its customer complaints. So it really doesn't matter what connection you have with your community and your brand and your brand ambassadors, or the size and scope of the brand, but this notion of service failures are relatively common and agnostic to the kind of brand that you are. We also see that there can be an amplification effect in that when people complain to an organization, they tend to also complain to a number of people, either in their social network, through social channels, or just through friends and family and kind of acquaintances. And recent research suggested that up to 90% of consumers read these online reviews, right? That obviously are often posted by people that have had these negative experiences and want to vent on social channels. And the flip side to that is that there's a whole range of people that say that they won't engage with a brand that has less than a 4-star rating, particularly in industries like hospitality, electronics, and local services. So there can be this kind of amplification effect between the experience an individual has and their amplification to their communities through social channels. So we think that these are very important things to consider in terms of service failures. But as I mentioned, we got thinking about this notion of what happens to the kinds of service failures that are too small to prompt customer complaint or for firms to easily identify. So we got looking at this notion of micro failures. What we started to do is look at, I guess, what research had already been existing in the market, what people have been looking at. There was nothing really in the marketing domain, but in the field of psychology, there was a lot of discussion of this theory of daily hassles, which are the small and everyday problems that people have in their lives, and they accumulate to be much larger sources of stress. And these little things could be just, small things that occur throughout your day. They could be relatively, small to any other person, but they have a large impact on you as an individual. And the important part here is that they compound, and they compound to the point where they create much larger stresses in your life.
It's kind of interesting. This is a quick example, but we talked about airlines, but it can happen in many other contexts. And I recently moved to a different part of San Diego, and there's a great cafe just around the corner, and I've been there 3 or 4 times, and every time something's gone wrong, and it's not been big enough to go through and actually complain about. Right? It's the order. I was like, "Can you make this quick? Is it gonna take a long time?" They're like, "Oh, yeah, it'll be quick," and it took 10 minutes, and I was like, "Not the end of the world, but not great," or the coffee's too cold or things like that. But again, it's relatively minor things that, because of social pressure, you feel kind of strange to the consumer bringing up. And any one of those incidents on their own wasn't enough. But if you do it enough times, eventually I'm like, okay, I'll go somewhere else. right? Which is what I've done. And it's unfortunate that like that it wasn't like there was one big mistake that they made that I could point my finger at and that I would bring up and complain about, but it's just a bunch of small inconveniences or hassles, as Sean says. Yeah.
And to that point, Colin, what you've gone through there through a series of small failures and has led you almost to this notion of silently defecting, where you don't make a complaint, you just consciously decide I'm going to go and consume from somewhere else. And that's exactly what we saw happening when we spoke to consumers about this notion of micro failures. This graph, I think, kind of sums us up, and I'll try and just describe this quickly. But you've got this solid line, which dips down and then comes back up. That's a typical service failure where you've got on the left, you've got satisfaction in terms of positive to negative. So we've got an experience that goes to very negative, so they have a service failure. There's a point of recovery, and that recovery, the failure or the satisfaction increases, and that satisfaction typically increases to a higher level than it was prior to the service failure. Whereas in contrast, we've got the line with the dots, and those individual dots represent individual micro failure occasions. So there's smaller things that on their own don't really drive you down to a point at which you complain, but they accumulate continuously to a point at which you silently exit from the relationship. And these things go unnoticed, they're relatively small, but over time they accumulate to a point at which they have a larger negative impact on the firm than any one macro failure or large failure can have.
And this is like what we were talking about with Lori earlier as well too, right? Like you were mentioning, Lori, you know when there's a shipment that's been delayed and when you're out of stock of something, right? And you can see those big green dips, right? Because those are things that are coming through in your ordering database. But I'm curious as to like other ways, or like have you seen stuff about trying to basically detect these smaller ones? Like, can you pick up on the little red sort of like graph dots?
Yeah, I actually think, as you were talking about, a lot of the time customers leave silently. So it's sometimes the big ones where they go to social or to their friends, but enough silent failures and they'll depart silently. And being able to communicate with your customer and be transparent, right? If an item's going to be on back order, or it's going to be delayed in shipping, or their shipping has been delayed. I mean, just being able to anticipate that is going to happen and communicate that with the customer, I think is better than not communicating and then they don't get their product in time, or they don't get it when they anticipate that it's supposed to be there. And so you spoke to it as well, empowering your customer service teams to make sure that they can make the decisions in order if somebody calls in that they can provide that free shipping for that order, or they can do something for that customer in order to help them. But yeah, you can see the small little, I would say, the things that just kind of tick away at a customer to the point that they'll go somewhere else.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me to sort of interrupt our flow, but I think about those big things and having had experiences where something significant has gone wrong, and I was so happy about the fix and how someone went out of their way to make it right, that I actually came out of that experience feeling better. It's like when a football example of the fastest man on the field is the quarterback that just threw an interception. That kind of thing. And it seems to me that there's a similar opportunity if we get good at sussing out these micro failures, to use that as an opportunity to not only learn how we do what we do better, but build some loyalty and appreciation. Because the sense I get is these cumulative things that add up kind of feels like no one cares. And the big things just kind of feels like someone messed up and they have a chance to fix it,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think anticipating the needs of the consumer, as Colin talked about, 10 minutes to him wasn't fast enough. And so anticipating what are the needs of the consumer in advance. I think a lot of the time you can just look at your own experience and how you would expect something to be. And if you, then can you anticipate it from there so that you can correct it to make it right?
Got you. Anything, just to follow up a little more on Colin's question, then I'll hand it back to you. But as you think about what you just went through, anything specific to direct selling, Lori, as you think about our world and where we live, that's different there?
Yeah, as I look at just the different small failures, a lot of the time it has to do with shipping, product product being on time, some of the aspects that are really out of the control once it leaves your warehouse and goes with the shipping company. And so making sure that maybe you need some touch points in there. That's just a small example. But I think as we look at it, we need to be really good communicators with not only our associates or our business partners, but also our customers. A lot of the time, we've spoken about, we anticipate that our associates are the ones that are having those conversations with their customers, but they can't communicate shipping. A lot of the time, they're not going to communicate back order. That really is a company responsibility to communicate that with the customer directly. And the customer expects that from the company. I wouldn't expect any of our business builders to be able to go out and communicate shipping times with their customers per se. That really should be coming from the company. And so being able to anticipate those needs of where does the company step in with the customer versus where's a business partner. And I think that's an important aspect of all of this that we need to get better at as an industry.
I agree. Okay, Colin and Sean, I'll hand it back to you. Sorry.
Thanks. No, that's fine. I think one of the things that came to mind for me in that discussion was I was at a presentation a few years ago, and I heard from the GM of marketing at Disney who was speaking about this experience, where she was basically giving an example of how they empower staff to solve problems. And she told a story of there was a family that were at Disney, and this little girl had lost her doll, and they went to Lost and Found, and it wasn't found. They were staying on site at the property. The doll turned up, and it turned out there'd been some renovations happening at Disney, and the doll had ended up in this construction zone and was all damaged. So the staff took this doll and they took it. Obviously, they have a whole area where they're making costumes. So they made these little costumes for the doll and replaced its clothing, and then took it on this journey through Disney with other characters, and were taking little photos of the doll. And they went back to the girls' hotel room and were like, "Look, we found your doll, and here's a whole lot of pictures of the amazing day that your doll had going on this journey around Disney without you." And just that ability for staff to look for little ways to correct problems and create those, they call it these little moments of magic, I think is a great way to kind of allow empowered staff to rectify and create surprise and delight moments. And that kind of leads to this point that if you look at the top part of this graph here, there's what you might call a spectrum of satisfaction, where you, at the base level of satisfaction, you're meeting a customer's minimum expectations. As you go up, you kind of exceed their maximum expectations and head into the zone of customer delight. So satisfaction is not a solid state, right? It varies from minimum to kind of maximum expectations and delight. And at the bottom end of this graph, this is the same thing we're saying for service failure. It's not a static zone. There's a service failure zone, which tends to be relatively large, but when you get to the smaller end of the scale, up towards the point of the zone of tolerance, the zone of tolerance is where people just accept kind of that things go wrong. As you head towards that zone of tolerance, you do get these little things that kind of bubble along under the water, these things we've been speaking about, these 10-minute waits and so on, that create disruptions and frictions for consumers to the point that they do build up over time, like we saw from that notion of the psychology of daily hassles. So this kind of led us to, in our paper, we talk about this whole build up and this background to the psychology of daily hassles. And we get to this point where we try to frame this notion of detecting, monitoring, and repairing microfailures. So we'll talk a little bit about these three areas now, and then go into some examples of how we think brands are doing quite well in this area in terms of detecting and repairing. So in terms of detecting microfailures, we think, first of all, as I touched on previously, it's really important to encourage customer complaint. Firms often, they have channels of complaint, but they don't necessarily foster complaint as a means of feedback. I think it's really important to make customers feel comfortable to complain, and to assure customers that the firm is listening, and to really tap into this notion of the smaller things, really make people feel valid in their concerns and recognize that nothing is too small. We're here, we're listening, and anything you have to say really is of value to help us improve our service to you. And as we've said as well, training staff is a really important thing, not only giving them the power to solve microfailures or solve failures more broadly, but also training them in empathy and not being judgmental towards these smaller things. Like, these small things like Colin's 10-minute wait at the cafe might just be for one person, whatever, it's not a major issue. But you need to take in the perspective of the consumer and really listen to them. In terms of operating and monitoring, we think that there's an opportunity. A range of firms, I'm sure, are doing customer listening and feedback through market research and other different means. Re-gear those systems to be able to track and monitor not only the larger things, but also smaller failures as well. One of the interesting things we found in our research is we actually asked consumers to provide us with just open responses about their complaints. And we found that the smaller the complaint, the larger the amount of text that people tended to write in the free form response. So there may be something in just understanding how many characters people are writing and how much detail they're putting into their complaint. Right, these small things do actually take up a whole lot of space in the way people want to complain about them as well. There's also an opportunity to move beyond to mine with machine learning, and Colin's been doing a lot in that regard as well.
Yeah.
But
just what you have said and written about people's sort of innate typical shyness about expressing complaints, and how technology really does change that and create an opportunity for us to just, again, suss these things out in a useful way.
Yeah, two quick things on that as well too. So the empathy and the being non-judgmental, I think, is important in the sense that sometimes it's not always apparent to a customer service agent that something has happened 10 times before, or this is that we're almost at that bottom point, and it can seem really minor. You're like, oh, you're just complaining about this, like, really, but the history may not be there. So I think going in and asking, like, has this happened before, or like, how have your other experiences been, is sort of an important thing to go through and do, because they may not have that context, and I may seem crazy to them bringing it up, but in reality, this is the 8th time that you haven't had something come with your coffee or whatever the case might be. It can be much more frustrating than the first time, right? Mm-hmm. The other thing that we noticed as well too is just when we started getting into this and looking at this in more detail, I was looking at customer service surveys that I received, and I'm sure, like most of you, the ones that you tend to receive tend to ask about your last experience. And I was surprised how few of the questions look at the totality of your relationship with the company and how your general experiences have been trending, as opposed to just how was your last visit at Target, how was your last visit at Starbucks, things like that. And so I'm curious as to like what might be happening in terms of direct sales. Like, do they look more of at a longer term perspective, or are they also, like everyone else, focus more so on just the last encounter when going through and sort of like doing these kind of customer service surveys?
Yeah, I can jump in and share with you what USANA is doing. I think that each company is different, but we have implemented surveys here at USANA, and so we're constantly getting that feedback from customers and communicating as items are updated. So again, going back to being out of product and then communicating this is out, but it will be back at the beginning of June or July, and just being transparent about it. This is a raw ingredient. We're in the middle of COVID, and so I think people can anticipate that we are having some issues that every company is dealing with different issues, and so being transparent about it. As a consumer, I want the company I'm buying from to be transparent, but especially if I'm a business partner, I want them to be transparent about it as well. And so doing surveys, going back and fixing those items and communicating that fix. So we've updated this. And I think even to the point of what you're talking about, that touch point back to that consumer that has, they were the ones who sent in the complaint, and getting back directly to them and saying, thank you. We really appreciate this information. This is what we've done in order to improve it, or improve your experience as well as everyone else's. Thank you for bringing this to us. I think really makes an impact and has an overall difference. But we can't be afraid of feedback. And I think some companies are. They're afraid of what they're going to hear. And eventually, I think that if you're afraid to hear feedback, you'll eventually maybe not even be around, because customers will silently leave, or they'll be out there on social and complain. And so I think it's important to anticipate the needs, but take that feedback in and then communicate out how you've solved that.
What about, Laura, you've talked about the corporate role. What about the Salesforce role in either discerning what those failures are or those struggles are, or communicating back to the customer? Like, what's their role in this customer-centric focus?
Good question. So a lot of the time, I think our industry has relied on our business partners or associates to had the relationship with the customer. And they do. They have that relationship in that they brought that customer to the company, and they still have that ongoing relationship. That's why, most of the time a customer is purchasing, because they've heard about the company through that associate. However, as I talked about earlier, I really feel it is the company's responsibility to then continue to build that, foster that relationship with that customer, to communicate with that customer, product information, shipping, pricing, marketing, promotions that are happening. Now, that doesn't mean that when you look at a promotion that you're going to be doing, you let your associates know so that they can reach out to their customers and let them know, hey, I know you buy this product. There's a promotion happening right now, so that they're able to deliver news as well. So in training your field and having those touch points, but the company needs to have equal touch points with that customer as well as the associate. And I know for a lot of the time that was taboo, right? They're my customers, don't talk to them. That's kind of been the feeling in the industry. And I think we've really built this transparency, and we're continuing to build it at USANA, but we've built this transparency to communicate with the associates that this communication is going out to your customer, or here are the types of communication that we're sending to your customers. So we have an onboarding campaign or a welcome drip email campaign where we send 3 or 4 emails to the customer to let them know about the company or the product or the information that will be beneficial to them in making a decision or a future buying decision. But we put that up on the website so that the associates or business partners can see what's being sent to their customers, and they can then follow up, which I think is really important. It's a partnership, but as a company, we do have responsibility because the customer is doing business with the company as well. And we have that responsibility to make sure that we are in contact with that customer, but also that partnership with the associate and letting them know what we're communicating, what's out there, how we're helping them retain that customer.
And I know you guys and a lot of companies were sort of ahead on moving toward this embrace of online tools and technology with your Salesforce and the rest. And that sort of got accelerated for all of us here in the last year and a half, but I would imagine that's made that much smoother for you as well with the Salesforce involvement.
Yeah, it does make it smoother. And I think one of the areas that we really focused in on is communication. We have a great individual, and she's actually on here, Amy Heron, who leads our communication. And she's done such an exceptional job with making sure that we're constantly communicating and building that transparency, which is important to a business partner, to a customer, that they're working with a company that has integrity, and they're working with a company that will be honest and open with them. And so her and her team have done such an exceptional job of making sure that we're constantly communicating and then following it back up with the customer or following back up with the associate to let them know this is now in stock or this is now available. Technology has been important, and we've put in surveys. You talk about reviews. If I'm going to go eat at a restaurant, I'm going to go Google it and look at the reviews before I go. And I think online reviews are really important in gathering those reviews on your own, on our own website, so that we have those as well. And being able to have that area on our own websites that a future customer or prospective customer can go and read about this product or the company. And technology plays a critical role in all of this because people expect things to work seamlessly, flawlessly. We are in a very high-tech world. You look at, I always look at like my kids have completely grown up with technology. Like they sometimes know technology better than I do. And so it's just become an expectation. And when something doesn't work, over time, if that continues to not work, they'll silently leave, or they'll leave a review and let you know their feelings.
Yeah. It's just too easy to find other places that things can be easier if we're not performing well in that. I just want to say one more time before I hand it back to Colin and Sean to continue to take us through that. please use that Q&A function. We really want to know what's on your mind, those friends that are with us, and we really want to make sure I've got a great panel here that we're addressing your questions and the things that you're most curious about that will be valuable to your company. So please, Sean and Colin.
All right, thanks. That's a great discussion. So from detect, we move on to repair. And there's a range of ways that we can repair micro failures. And often it could just be a small gesture or a non-monetary compensation. It doesn't need to be, a large discount or, something to do with a financial payment. Also around legitimizing the need for and normalcy of complaints, recognizing that the effect of the relative size of complaints is important. Colin touched on the fact that training staff to understand the background of the story, the customer's background, their prior experience is really important, and that really builds into this notion of recognizing that the single point in time, what they're complaining about or what you've identified as a complaint, may not be the entire picture. It could just be the tip of the iceberg. And we've touched a lot on empowering staff to make recovery determinations as well, and giving them the kind of ability to surprise and delight. So I don't need to repeat that. Moving from the repair, we move into the prevention. So how can you actually prevent these things from happening? If we can stop them before they happen, that's obviously better than trying to repair them. We've touched a little bit on surveying and recognizing what's happening in the market and trying to touch on that and improve that in a continuous way, embedding continuous improvement efforts into the organization. Also building a culture of responsiveness to problems. Too often, as we've discussed, and as Laurie mentioned, firms aren't open or necessarily open to negative criticism. But this is really something that I think firms should increasingly be open to. I think touching on technology as well, as we see technology start to be embedded more into the customer journey and customer experience, I think we're going to see technology being not just used as a source of helping customers to have a more seamless experience, but also helping them to have a more seamless complaints experience. If you think about the way voice is being used now and chat functionality on websites and Siri and the likes, I think we're going to get to a point where people will be able to have conversations with devices and provide that feedback directly to firms in a verbatim way. It can also be something to consider is not necessarily setting expectations too high. We're constantly striving to make customers feel as if they're having or will have the best experience. But sometimes it can be enough to kind of under promise and over deliver. And we're not saying necessarily go and tell customers they're going to have a terrible experience with you and then not let them have a great experience, but necessarily tell them, it's set their expectations to a realistic measure, and then strive to go above and beyond that to create satisfaction, surprise, and delight through the baseline experience that you can provide as an organization.
I'm curious, especially about this one, because I know it's kind of a contentious idea of going in and sort of under promising, but then I know airlines do it because they'll pad their schedules so that there's extra time for them to get to the gate. And you were also talking about shipping as well, Laurie. And I know many companies will say it'll be 5 days and then it comes in 2 days, right? Are there other strategies you have that you use to sort of gives yourself some wiggle room, or is this not something that is as applicable? Or
Yeah, I think this is a really important one because we can get really excited, right, in our industry, and we can share when a product is launching and then maybe it delays. And so I think it's important that you have a product launching in July and maybe you're teasing up to it from May into July in leading into it, but being able to not put it out there and say we'll have this product in May and then it doesn't come until July, right? I think that is really important in our industry, and I do think a lot of companies do that with the shipping of 5 to 7 days, and then they, that surprise that they get it in 2 days and they're happier because of that, I think is really important. Building trust when you're working with a sales force is critical, and making sure that you are delivering in what you say that you're going to be delivering. I know that we can get ahead of us because we know the strategy internally. So we know what's coming, 2, 3, 4 years down the road. It's just being mindful for someone that's out there building a business, for them 2, 3, even 6 months is a long time. Even internally, it may not seem that long. At the, at your corporate office, it may not seem that long. But to someone that's building a business, that can be a long time. And so we just have to keep that in mind, that even though we know the strategy 2 to 4 years out, we need to make sure of how we're communicating that and those realistic expectations. So somebody doesn't hear something, but it's still, a year out. And so we try and make sure that this is coming Q2 or Q3 of 2022, or, making sure that we're setting those realistic timelines as we're communicating. Because I think it can be really detrimental to building trust when someone thinks that it's coming out sooner, and then they just keep feeling deflated somewhat, that the company can't deliver on their promises.
It's a really interesting perspective you just made me think about, which is like, we've been thinking about customers, but I guess in some ways you're very unique in terms of the business that you're running, where you have customers, the end consumers who buy, but in some ways the sales associates are also customers, right? Because then you have to manage their expectations, manage relations with them. So I guess there could be also potentially micro failures with them too, right? And there's basically two groups here, two stakeholders you have to sort of manage and work with, which must be very challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's the opportunity there because we are communicating with our business partners, and we're also communicating with their consumers or our consumers as well. And so it's really important that if I'm going to do business with a company, I want them to be transparent with me of what's happening, what's coming. And I think that's important that we have that responsibility to be transparent with our business partners so they know what is happening in the industry. A lot of our business partners may have never owned a business before. So this is their first experience with entrepreneurship or owning a business. And so being transparent with them and helping them understand, the financial side or the regulatory environment that may be happening at the time. And I think communicating that in a transparent way of how this helps them grow their business, how this helps them bring customers to their business is really important. But yeah, we have to make sure that we're communicating with our associates and business partners as well as with our customers. And so there is that communication with both groups.
All right, I'm going to move on to just the last sort of section of our discussion, which is where we're going to talk about, I guess, some things that we see as things brands are doing to either prevent, repair, mitigate service failures, and more broadly, just how the industry is operating. We had a lot of discussion around service staff and their ability to surprise and delight. I think it's interesting reflecting on the brands I've seen over the years that do this very well. Obviously, Disney is, Moments of Magic is, the pinnacle of this. But there's a brand you may have seen in the US that opened a few years ago called Camp. They're a kids store. They've got stores. I think their flagship was at Hudson Yards. They've got a few stores now throughout the US. But really interesting store concept. And the staff in the store are very much encouraged to engage the children. The children are seen as the end customer. And they come into these physical environments, and the staff they take on the role as a camp leader, and their entire role in store is to play with kids and to take products out of the box and to create the experience and moment in store with products, as opposed to having consumers just coming in and seeing things on the wall. So there's little things like that, just the way you can encourage consumers to touch, feel, play, and interact with your products that creates this kind of notion of surprise and delight. But we're seeing a lot in terms of technology coming to the fore, and brands are constantly looking for new ways to engage consumers through tech. Retail is kind of at the fore of this, and we see a whole lot of different things that brands are doing to either make the consumption experience or the journey more seamless, or to smooth out kind of disruptions in the customer journey from pre-purchase to purchase and post-purchase. And there's a lot that's been discussed around that. Colin, you had an example with some roses. Did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think one of the ideas behind the whole surprise and delight concept is that we might not always be able to go through and detect these micro failures. And so sort of like a personal relationship, realizing that if we can't always detect them, but we know that they're probably happening, right? We can try and mitigate them by doing sort of random sort of surprise and delight, or random acts of kindness or generosity, or whatever the case might be, to sort of hopefully counter that sort of slippage you might have otherwise over time. And going through and preparing this presentation with Sean, it reminded me of a story I'd heard once where there was a gentleman buying, this is very gendered, I apologize, it's not 2021, but the gentleman buying flowers at a grocery store, and some other guy asked him, like, what did you do wrong? And he said, I'm not quite sure, but I know I did something. Right? And he was just doing it preemptively because he knew that there was probably something he'd done to piss off his wife or girlfriend in the last, a week or so, right? But he was just doing that in sort of a preemptive way. And I think it's sort of the same kind of scenario could apply here too, right? For brands, we're just once in a while going through and doing something sort of like out of the ordinary to sort of perhaps sort of make up for things that might not have been noticed.
I think it's a good point, that notion of random acts of kindness. I think if brands can start to think about how they can create these random acts of kindness throughout their customer experience, it's a great way to really get ahead of the ball and kind of mitigate service failures.
Yeah.
Sounds like Lori.
Yeah, I think this is a great opportunity. And if you look at some of the areas that companies have really gone the extra mile with this, even touch points, just they're free, right? You got to create the email or the text message or the phone call. But what I've noticed is just the touch points. We had one of our management team members here that ordered something, and he got an email from the president that said, hey, thanks for ordering this. I'm here. I'd love to hear your feedback on your experience with this product. And he was blown away, right? But it's just that extra touch point. But he's like, he doesn't know me, but it was like, hey, Brent, very personal, a nice email to him, and it's a touch point. And I think there's an opportunity there that we continue to look at our associate journey as well as our customer journeys, and how can we add touch points to surprise and delight with their, anniversaries, birthdays. People want to feel valued and appreciated, as you talk about those random acts of kindness. And so being able to surprise and delight, happy anniversary, thanks for being with us for a year. Here's 10% off your next order, or here's a free product for you to try, or just something, just a nice little surprise and delight. Even just the message of happy anniversary sometimes for a customer really has that meaning behind it. And so I think it's important to really look at that. The other area that I look is so many different companies now have created badges, and badges are free. So you look at Peloton. I cycle, so I'm on Zwift, and you get these points to get, I get virtual shoes or virtual hat when I ride a certain amount of time. And so it's the same thing, like Peloton has done this, and other companies have done this with stars or badges that are free or can be redeemed towards something for the future. And I think those surprise and delight, people really like the badges of, within our industry, I would compare it to congratulations, you've just brought in your first family member, or you just brought on your first customer, or you've just earned your first check or something like that. And it can be as simple as a touch point for our associates that way, in making a difference, or even a touch point of caring about somebody of, you've been taking our product now for 30 days. How do you feel? So just those little touch points that can really enhance their journey and their experience, but also show that you care about them or that you value them.
And Lori, I'm curious for you, and of course, Sean and Colin as well, as you begin to see these patterns of micro failures, these things that tend to add up and produce the fade away of the customer and those kinds of things. Do you kind of strategically make assumptions? Okay, this is probably much more widespread than we've been able to detect, and look for that surprise and delight widely for everybody opportunity. Is that how you would approach that?
I think there's certain areas that you can look at that.
Right.
There's certain aspects of probably your business that you continue to hear about. And so obviously those are micro failures that you need to clean up or that you need to fix for everyone, for widespread. I think you can do the anniversary message, right? Individual, but it can go out to everybody and be general. But I also think there are individual opportunities for you to surprise and delight. And it goes back to empowering your sales team or your customer service team to be able to make those decisions. Whether it's a micro failure or whether it's, I'm going to put this in your next order, we do some sampling in different orders. And so being able to put samples in orders of try this, maybe you want to put it on your next order. And it's fun to be able to get a free sample of something that's just a little surprise and delight. So it can go, I think, both ways. It's if you've got micro failures that you're continuing to hear about, you better get those fixed in your business or you're going to continue to lose customers.
Right.
But I think there's also an opportunity for widespread, but also for niche or for individual attention and recognition and surprise and delight.
One more time, I want to encourage, we're getting down toward the end of our time. We have a little time left. If you have questions of our guests, please ask them in that Q&A function. Sean, take it away.
We only have a couple more slides, but one of the points I wanted to raise, which Laurie had already mentioned, is this notion of the last mile. Often firms, take their products, box them up beautifully, and then they kind of put them into the ether, and someone else then delivers them, and it's kind of up to whether or not they're going to be delivered on time, are they going to be damaged, how are they going to arrive at the customer's house. There's a lot of effort that firms are putting into to really place a greater deal of control over that last mile. And in fact, there's a whole range of firms that are popping up as what they're calling specialist post-purchase firms. Bond is an example. You may have heard of Enjoy, which was created by Ron Johnson, who was the founder of the Apple Store concept. And the kind of difference there is like, for example, with Enjoy, they're very much about taking the product from the store, physically then taking it to the consumer and helping them to unbox that product and to actually go through the setup of that new device. So there's a whole range of different ways that you can engage post-purchase. But to this point here, I think is a nice quote. And again, to Laurie's kids, and I've got kids as well that are young, but my 1-year-old, it's interesting. I've got a 4-year-old who, when she was young, she would touch devices and expect everything to be touchscreen. I've got a 1-year-old now, and it's changed in 3 years in that he now talks to everything. So he thinks everything needs to be voice activated, right? So that's the difference we've had in 3 years. But if you look at this quote, right, consumers are, they're used to seeing their French fries delivered on their mobile in real time. So, they expect, that's what they expect from their French fries. What do you think they expect from you as a brand? So I think we need to take learnings from what's best in practice and how we can deliver those expectations and meet those expectations. The final point we want to touch on is we've been speaking a lot about high tech and low tech, and I think it's really important to just drive home that these solutions, ways to prevent, mitigate micro failures, don't necessarily need to be high tech. There's examples where like Kroger and Microsoft, partner and create moments and make recommendations to consumers through smartphone devices and so on. That's fantastic, but it doesn't need to be that advanced. It could be as simple as just rolling out curbside collection, as in the case of Aldi. There's a great example I heard a few years ago, which is when Toys R Us were going through their kind of huge decline, is that they missed this differentiation between high touch and high tech. They went down the high tech route. You could walk into the store as a parent. They thought that the purpose was to get a parent and their kids in and out of the store as quickly as possible. So they invested in technology to help customers when they're in store, find the product they want, get to that product and get out. But they failed to realize that kids wanted to spend time in the store, playing with, engaging with products. And actually that was what would have created a more meaningful experience for those families. And there's a whole range of brands that went down that high touch route. Like if you look at, for instance, like the kind of Legoland stores where you go into. So that differentiation really lost that connection to consumer, and was one of the reasons that was quoted for their eventual demise. So your solutions don't always need to be high tech. They can be a combination of, or even just purely a focus on a more low tech solution.
Laurie, as I think about our businesses and that sort of unique space that we hold in the high touch, high tech conversation, are there any just particular opportunities that you see as we as direct sellers, social sellers have that, or strategies that we have that maybe aren't that easily available to typical retail?
Yeah, I as you're talking about this, we have a huge community of business partners that are our ambassadors, that are out there. They love the brand, they're loyal to the brand, they care, and they're the ones that are really making an impact and a difference. And so it is that, it's still that high touch, but when you look at, you have hundreds of thousands of ambassadors out there selling your product, but they love what they do. And so using that, the community aspect that our companies create, I think is tremendous. The product value that we have, our associates or business partners that love the brand, that are out there advocating for the brand, are significant, because it takes a brand quite a bit of time to build that brand following. And within our industry, all of us have associates or business partners that are huge advocates. So how do you reward that, advocacy of the brand? We launched a refer a friend program for our customers to be able to start earning product vouchers for sharing the product with their friends and family. I think that's a way to be able to show we care about you, and we know you love the product, and so as you share, we're going to give you product vouchers to then get your product paid for. And I think those little touch points along the way, kind of as I talked about, really relooking at the journeys of both our associates and our customers, and adding in those touch points that are free to us as companies. It's free in the thought, but yeah, I know it has to be programmed and those details, but it does have an impact. It does make a difference in the overall retention and advocacy of both the associate and the customer and their feelings towards your brand and your product.
So we are nearing the end of our time together, and this is fantastic, and I think much more to come on this discussion. We've had a captivated audience who has loved this conversation so much that we don't have more questions from them, but I know that we'll continue the conversation. Let me ask the three of you this, and perhaps ask it in a couple of ways. One, is there something I should have asked you that I didn't? And two, having this opportunity with each other, is there something that the two of you would love to learn from Lori as you think about further research? And Lori, from Dr. Campbell and Dr. Sands, as you think about your own opportunities and priorities.
I'm really curious to ask Lori about all the associates, because I think that in some ways you might be really uniquely positioned to be able to kind of detect these microfailures, because they have firsthand interaction with customers, right? Maybe not as much during COVID, but I mean, do you think they're able to sense when customers might be upset, or if they're standoffish, or sort of see these things coming? And do you think maybe direct selling actually might be better equipped to sort of like try to prevent this and these kind of situations from happening?
Yeah, really good question. Over these past couple of years, we have taken on focus groups and individuals that are passionate about certain areas of the business. So we have a customer task force, or you have a technology task force, and you may have 5 to 7 individuals, but they're really passionate about that. And being able to have this open, candid conversation with them and have them provide you feedback so that they do know what their customers, these are individuals that are bringing into the company hundreds of thousands of customers. And so asking them, where are the gaps? What can we do to improve? Where we might be missing? And being able to have those transparent discussions with those 5 to 7 individuals that are really passionate, I think has made a significant difference in what we've added from our journey, or different aspects of the business and where we've taken it or made changes, right? Maybe we need to make changes to our subscription model. Maybe we need to make changes to some of the compensation and how we're helping, or we talked about the refer a friend program. And so I think there's opportunities to really listen to individuals. But one thing that I found is making sure that you're listening to these individuals that are passionate about it, because maybe you bring on this associate that just because they're a top leader in your organization, but they're not passionate about customers. You need to make sure that you have the right individuals on the task force, and that you're listening to those individuals that are passionate about that certain area of the business. And so we do have a great opportunity with our associates to be able to learn from them and to anticipate needs and become better with them as well as their customers.
That's great. That's great. Well, Dr. Colin Campbell, Dr. Sean Sands, and Lori Truman, Vice President of U.S. Sales at USANA Health Sciences. It's a great conversation. Thank you so much for being a part of this, and we look forward to continuing this conversation among each other as the three of you pursue your work in different ways. We really appreciate our fellows who bring their expertise and bring their research and bring their knowledge to direct selling companies and work with direct selling companies on how we get better at what we do and how the world can learn from what we do and how we can learn from those that are doing compelling research. Again, I want to mention that that Dr. Sands and Dr. Campbell's paper is in the chat. A lot of depth on the subjects that we've discussed here today. And I would commend that to your attention. It's a great read and there's great information there that they've done a great work, award-winning paper. And I want to encourage you all to avail yourself of our many customer-centric series, webinars, and discussions that are available on our YouTube channel, as this will be as well, for your review once more. And I want to thank those who do and encourage others to continue to support the Direct Selling Education Foundation. We exist on voluntary contributions from Direct Selling Association members to be able to create these partnerships with these brilliant people who speak value into our industry and work in partnership with our industry to help not only improve what we do, but improve the reputation and knowledge and understanding of direct selling and how it works. So I would encourage you to go to the link that's shared there and contribute if you don't, and contribute more if you do. We appreciate you all. Also want to mention that our annual meeting, DSA's annual meeting, Engage 2021, is scheduled for October 31st through November 2nd in person in New Orleans. I know we're all looking forward to getting together for that. And also we'll be doing a virtual conference. DSA will be doing a virtual Engage conference June 7th through the 9th. That would be at the typical time that we would do our annual meeting. So we're looking forward to getting together, exchanging great information, learning from each other virtually once more, and then in person in New Orleans. Lori, Sean, and Colin, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us. Yeah, and thank you, Lori, for all of your insights.
Yeah, thank you. It's very nice to meet you guys. Thank you.
See you later. Thank you again. Yeah.
Bye, guys.